Okay, moving forward, I'll quickly introduce the panel for our last panel discussion of the day, wherein they're going to discuss evolution of sports and gaming business through digital platforms. To moderate this session, may I request Mr. Amit Doshi, founder and CEO, IVM Podcasts, to please join us here on the stage once again. The panelists for the last session of the day, ladies and gentlemen, would like to begin by inviting Anish Madani, ex-head of Sports Partnerships, Asia Pacific Twitter. Aneesh was till recently the Asia Pacific head of sports partnership at Twitter. His career began as a freelance sports journalist at the Deccan Chronicle newspaper. Later, he led marketing for World Series Hockey and the Neo Sports TV broadcast network. Easy. The next name on the panel that we have today is Mairu Gupta, Senior Director, Content and Media Distribution, NBA. As Senior Director, Content and Media Distribution, Mairu Gupta leads the media distribution business for the NBA in India. Gupta also oversees NBA India's marketing initiatives. And the last one on the panel for today, we have Asha Thacker, everyone, former Sports Partnerships Head, India and South Asia, Facebook. Asha Thacker is the former Sports Partnerships Head for Facebook in India and South Asia and Cricket Partnership globally. A seasoned digital media and sports professional, Asha joined Facebook from IMG Reliance, where she was the General Manager, Strategic Alliances, forging partnerships with top brands, as well as being the social media lead. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel for the day. Amit is moderating the session. We were to be joined by Somnava Naskar and Manasi Joshi, but they couldn't join us here due to some reasons. But nevertheless, we have a fantastic panel with us here today for the last panel discussion of the day. So ladies and gentlemen, with this, I hand it over to you, Amit, to take this forward. Give it up, everyone. We are all set for the last and the final panel discussion of the day. And let's welcome the panelists.
Hi, welcome everybody. We have these lovely introductions, which are everybody's been introduced. So, let me start with a question for you, Mairu. I'll start with this, right? So I want to ask you that you're running a league, or you're responsible for the media streaming of a league over here in India, which is not at the same level as something like cricket, right? So, but how has streaming changed, right? How has League Pass specifically as a thing that you guys are putting out there, the way that people are watching NBA games, how has that changed things in the last few years?
Hello. So, I mean, for the uninitiated, League Pass is the NBA's subscription service which consumers can purchase and then watch live NBA games on the app, right, and on the web. So, the goal has been to make the content more accessible in the way that consumers want to consume it, right, across platform. So in League Pass, for example, one of the things we did a couple of years ago was introduce mobile view, which is, on the court, actually put separate cameras that allow for close-up shots to be shot, while the player's going. So instead of the full court, it'll only show, 1/4 or half of the court. Right. So the action's much closer, the ball's you can see the ball, otherwise you can't see it on the mobile screen. So instantly, you see results where, more than 50% of people who are watching on mobile now are choosing mobile view as the default for their streaming, access, and we've seen about 20x increase in the last 2 years in active subscriptions on League Pass.
Oh wow, okay, that's a lot. Glad to know that. No, the more people like the NBA, the happier I am, just generally.
You're an NBA fan, that's why you're happy.
I am. I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and watch many, many games.
You're my man. You're my man.
Anish, so, again, since we're talking about NBA, let's take the NBA to Twitter, right? Recently, I heard Jack Dorsey on a podcast, and somebody asked him what's his favorite part of Twitter. And he said, I love NBA Twitter. So, what I want to ask you is, can you talk a little bit about how you work with athletes to kind of get this degree of intimacy that you see on on Twitter from them, right? What kind of things do you do with athletes? How do you work with them? How do you kind of then how do you turn that into a thing which leads to the 20x increase that he saw?
Yeah, I think as with any creators on any platforms, the first thing you really have to do as a platform is to build trust. right? With the leagues, with the athletes and the creators. So I think all of this started many, many years ago. I think the NBA, like we call it at Twitter, is they're amongst the most progressive sports leagues in the world, right? Like they have a very, Adam Silver said this famously, that highlights is marketing. Yeah. We want to make sure that wherever our fans are, they're able to obviously access those highlights. So I think early on, this is, I guess, late 2000s when they actually started having some of the athletes get onto the platform. And I think some sports serve themselves better to platforms than others. Basketball, again, is a sport where you can see the players a lot. They have a lot of personality, kind of cuts across not just sport, but culture and fashion and music and a whole host of those things, which makes a really big difference. And I think what they then do is to make that a habit. So I know that every year when, say, the NBA draft would happen, they would make sure that the athletes getting into the draft were tutored and they were, put onto all of these platforms by the NBA themselves, in partnership with Facebook and Twitter and a whole host of other platforms. So I think that building of trust over many years helps. I think it also really helps when the superstars of the game are leading the way. Right. If you look at someone like LeBron, I think he's got, a voice and personality and talks about like being like more than just an athlete. Mm-hmm. So I think all of those things combine and come together. And a lot of what we've done, even in India, for example, is you always start with the leaders. It's always easier to say, oh, cool, like who has a voice that everyone wants to listen to, and then you make everyone else more comfortable as a result of that. And I think a lot of it in the last few years, non-cricket sports in particular, especially individual athletes in Olympic sports, in their moments of victory, I think like that's the best time for them to come out and, whether they were there on platforms or not, we've seen that kind of surge happen. So like just one example is when Sakshi Malik won her Olympic bronze medal. It happened at a time when 15 days had gone past in the Olympics. There wasn't a medal that India had won. And then out of the blue, she wins this unexpected medal at 3:30 in the morning India time. So everyone wakes up to the news that India has won their first Olympic medal. And then you work closely with their teams in the moment to say, this is the best time for her to have a voice out there. Right. And then you see the magic. I mean, a lot of people ask us, how do you get followers on Twitter? Winning an Olympic medal is a really good short way of getting that.
I don't think that that's a transferable idea for a lot of other people, right? Though. Asha, what I wanted to ask you is somewhat along the same lines, right? In terms of how does Facebook work with athletes as partners, leagues, and things like that. But I also kind of want to touch on the fact that Facebook has been exploring the rights business a lot more as well, right? So I think there was a bid for the IPL, which didn't come through. But La Liga is done through, I think distribution rights for that in India are there, right? So you guys are looking at rights as well as these other things. How do these things play together?
Yeah, so I think my required disclaimer is, given that I'm no longer at Facebook, even if I say we, that's just a misspoke. But I was involved in all of the deals that you mentioned, so I can speak very much to them. Sure. And I think it speaks to kind of the power of sport to bring people together. So while there's business reasons behind anything, I think when you look at when we were first moving towards investing in sports and sports content, we really were looking at, where are people coming together? And Saket earlier, who I worked with when I was at Facebook, talked about the community that Facebook was looking to build, and how community forms the foundation of everything that the company does. And when we actually look at where people are still coming together in real time, sports is one of the few remaining areas in the world where people come together in real time. And people build communities. You go to bars and watch it. You go to your friend's house and watch it. People may be in various locations, but you're on WhatsApp chatting with each other. You're doing different things. So when we looked at what content is really going to build communities, sports was the shining star. Right. And that was really the driving factor in the investment. And I think when we look at like any platform that's really investing in sports, that's the main reason why. And I recently read that Hotstar is increasing their social component during the IPL this year. Instead of just being able to play games, and if you watched the IPL on Hotstar last year, you could do a quiz game during the game. Yes. They're now socializing it so you can play that same game with your friends during the game. And I think that's very much in line with how we were looking at we would look at potentially, the IPL as a platform.
Right.
But it's more about how can we use that content to bring communities together. And Facebook has made as much investments in live sports as they have in non-live content.
Right.
So whether it be shows like Tom versus Time, which you and I talked about earlier, athlete content, a lot of it is just this is what brings people together, and that's what the investment is for.
Right. You mentioned live versus non-live, right? So Mairu, I'd like to ask you a question around that. I have a question around that, right? The question I'd like to ask is, the league pass comes at an awkward time, right? Most NBA games are played at an awkward time in India. What is the split between people who watch live and people who watch later in the day or something like that?
I can't give you the split between live and non-live, but what I can tell you is that the 20x growth that I spoke about earlier was on live itself. So, so the constant effort from our end is to make the game more relevant and obviously more accessible. So, in the way that people want, again, because that's what's going to drive even people in the morning. So, if you are a casual fan who flirts with the NBA on social media, on VOD, you're trying to retarget that person or talk to them again and talk to them in, with the content that they want to see, with the teams that they love or the players that they love over and over again. So you graduate that fan to someone who will ultimately become the fan that you want them to become and wake up at 8 in the morning. It's not 6, it's 9 a.m. Is the second game when the second West Coast game is 9 a.m. So
I am a fan of the East Coast team, so I mean, for me, it's 5:30 or 6 in the morning. But okay, that's interesting. So
I think just one on that note, and I know Aneesh touched on Adam Silver saying the highlight is marketing, and I think one of the biggest changes I've seen in the last, I'm going to say 12 months, it may be 2 years, is the existence of long-form game recaps. And I think there's this idea of whether it's an IPL match that ends at midnight, at the end of the day, those games end late for a lot of working people. People want to wake up in the morning and get a digestible update on what happened that isn't a scoreline. Right. Because we no longer live in a world where a scoreline is enough, or when we used to just read the Cricinfo commentary, which is fantastic, but is not enough. Right. So the idea of waking up, get a digestible amount that you can go to your office and have a great conversation over lunch or over coffee, over a smoke, if that's what you do, and be part of that conversation and community is, I think, a big trend that I've seen change in the more recent time, and digital on all platforms, whether it's owned and operated platforms like League Pass or their website or Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. That, I think, is people wake up saying, the game happened, let me go find out, or I saw this scoreline, how did that happen? Right. And then they are more than willing to invest that time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, in that catch-up. Then they're part of that community again. They can be part of the conversations on any of the platforms. They can say their experiences. They can celebrate, when so-and-so got 100 and feel like they're part of that. And before, you didn't really have as many opportunities. I saw that hit with my own eyes, right, as opposed to I read it the next morning in the paper.
No, I would agree with that, actually. Again, from my own experience on the NBA app, and I'm sorry to make this a full NBA thing, but with my experience on that app, I watched the 15-minute mini games a lot, right, where they kind of if there's a game that I thought was interesting or something like that, and I'm not going to watch, some teams which I have no interest in, but I want to watch the game, so I'll just watch those 15-minute highlights. I think that speaks to the same thing. Okay, sorry.
I said you're absolutely right. Yeah. So that's exactly what the function of it's designed to fulfill that need as well.
Okay, I wanted to kind of lay a parallel out for you guys, right? One of the things that people talk about in terms of how entertainment content has progressed is the advent of the OTT platforms, the Netflix, the Amazons, etc., has led to this possibility where you can see more niche-driven content. Are you seeing rises? You've seen a 20x rise in the NBA, but for the questions for both of you, do you see rises in some of the less traditional sports, like basically everything but cricket, like things like kabaddi and things like volleyball? I think there's a new league that started, or the ISL, or stuff like that. Are you seeing rises in consumption on those sports, given the fact that they are now available on a streaming platform?
It's a good question. I think a lot of what happens is, we're still in a place where the gap is so large, right? That it's hard to put number to it and say, oh, is this meaningful or not yet? I think the way we want to look at it is that at this point in time, are you inspiring kids to play, right? And that's maybe some of the role that the platforms can play, in that you want to be able to see a highlight from whether it's grassroots, youth league football, or whether it comes in the ISL, or whether it happens in volleyball. In order to create that moment, you have to give several chances, right? I think some of the creators earlier today were talking about how there's a lot of hard work in creating these videos, and you don't know which video will go viral or which video will make it big. And I think that commitment then needs to be there from the leagues, the athletes, the teams. I think one of the big things that we used to talk to our partners about was to understand that it's not just one voice that fans want to discover this from. I think what the NBA in particular has been able to do well is that it is the entire ecosystem, right? Whether it is a league, a team, a commentator, an athlete, a super fan, whoever you want to sort of follow across any of these platforms and get your news from, you then are able to get it from there. So that's why I think it's very exciting that you could have something like that just explode. I would say, one good example of this is women's cricket, right? Like when the Indian team had this really great run at the Women's Cricket World Cup in 2017, went all the way to the final, as nail-biting final that was happening, you suddenly started seeing conversation about that sport a lot more. And so I think what you want to do is to be prepared for the moment when something breaks out, and make sure that you're the people that people want to hear from, because ultimately people want to also listen to people on these platforms, are there and are being trained and are put in a position where they can make your sport really big.
I think I completely agree with Aneesh on this, but I also think one of the biggest changes, and as the growth of OTTs has also been mirrored by the lowering cost of data in India. And I think, if we still look at, I think I read a stat recently that, close to 98% of households in India are still one TV households, and many are are zero TV households still. And I think when we look at what the platform generation has been able to do is we've democratized the way people watch content. So if you are in a house and I'll be honest, the audience is maybe 18 to 20-year-old boys. I'm making no qualms that men tend to be the target audience for a lot of this. At 8 p.m., the person controlling the remote control is your mom, maybe your grandma. It's not you, and that may be when your kabaddi match is on. It's you're sharing a room with your sibling, and it's 11 p.m. and there's an EPL match on. So what I really feel the platforms have been able to do, combined with the data costs going down, is allow people to take control over what they watch. And I think that's been magical. And we've been able, there's now an ability for there be to, if you care about a sport, you can find it, and that watching experience can be just yours. And that's where platforms like Hotstar, Facebook, Twitter are really trying to make it so those experiences aren't just you in that show or you in that live stream. It's you and your friends, chatting together, doing things with it. And so that's where we've seen niche sports really come out, because now people have the ability to find them, discover them, and consume them, rather than not competing for that small screen in their living room. And I think that's been one of the most dramatic changes that the platforms have brought.
That brings up an interesting thought. So one of the strengths of NBA Twitter, if you will, right, is the fact that there's so much stuff going on at the same time when the match. That's why I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, right? I could just as easily watch it at 9, but it's fun to consume it while you're consuming Twitter at the same time. And I think that is, you mentioned the fact that it makes sense from the rights perspective because you can create social experiences around that, right? So what are the kinds of things that you think that people would want to do in that context, right? As a social experience while watching sports.
I mean, I dream of a world where I am watching a game and no rights holder in the world would allow this right now, but I'm able to watch a game and do a custom commentary live with my friends. Right. Similar to what you see in esports. I mean, if you look at the way esports works and the way a creator in esports is really commentating his own game, that's the dream, in my opinion, for traditional sports.
You think that that's something that we, so again, sorry to bring this to podcasting, but we had Harsha Bogle on a podcast a couple of months ago, and he was mentioning this idea that he would love to see multiple commentary streams available for people. You have a stream for somebody who is a casual fan. You have a stream for somebody who's an analytics fan. You have a stream with a couple of comedians for people who just want to joke around.
We're not that far away from that, and I would say that it's already happening in some senses. If you look at multilingual feeds, the only difference is just adding another one. Right. And I think the main challenge is, as rights holders and owners of rights, the main thing is you want to ensure that your brand is being presented in the best way. And traditional sports brands and sports owners, and I'll pass the mic to Mairu after this, but they have brands to protect. And I think it's just seeing if moving into that direction still helps them build the brands the way they want to.
What are your thoughts on this, Mairu?
So you need to download League Pass. But so once you know, when you're watching a live stream on League Pass, specifically, you have 6 streams. One is the home, away, mobile, and multi-language, Chinese, Spanish, right? And recently we tried to get influencer feeds in, where we got influencers to talk to their fans and allowed that as an alternate feed on League Pass, which has actually turned out to be really good. This would
be Indian influencers or
no,
international?
This is globally. But
so is this the players only thing? Is that, or is that something else?
Players only.
Yeah, isn't there some players only commentary stream that TNT makes available?
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. And then in India, on Sony 6 and on Live also, there's a Hindi stream where we've got multiple influencers also coming in and kind of joining the commentary panel and doing doing their take on the game. And that's now going to be routed back to League Pass and be available to all global audiences as well.
Nice. Very cool. That sounds that seems like we're getting closer to what we were talking about there.
Yeah, and adding on to that, actually, the opportunity for creators also is that one of my friends who's not a sports fan once said this about. She was saying how Twitter makes me feel smarter about sports, right? And you can apply that to a variety of platforms, because she was primarily like, listen, I feel like the commentary in the match is tuned to a person that already knows the sport, right? You're saying you're using terms which you think they're already familiar with. You're not necessarily providing color commentary because you have restrictions on doing that. But, comedians may be sending tweets in real time. Somebody else could be assessing, doing a fun YouTube clip of 2 minutes after the game to say, this is my match review. Somebody else could be doing, going live on Facebook during that time, or just doing audio, for instance. And I think that's the core thing to solve, right? Why do fans consume sport? Maybe there could be many reasons to do it, but from a casual fan's perspective, which is the sort of widest net you want to cast, there is a conversation to be had perhaps the next day, right? And you want to be smart about that conversation. So what role can you, the creator, play in that? And then that just starts making it more interesting.
So you just set me up to say start a podcast, so I'm going to say start a podcast. But, that I guess is this. I think that's great for this. Let's kind of open it up for audience questions. Yeah. Are there any questions from the audience for the panel? There we go.
Hi. So, digital now is exploding, and there are so many users, and this data is cheap, and everything is growing so fast. And cricket, being one of the sports, getting a lot of traction. So many influences are there, and it is major. So, in coming time, what do you think? Which sport has got that potential that it will pick up more on digital after cricket?
Basketball.
No, so Mairu and I flew on the same plane. We ended up sitting next together on the flight, coincidentally, and we talked about this exact question. And I think, on a personal level, I think the beauty of digital is that there will never be a clear number 2. I think there is scope, there is an appetite, there is the ability for the pie to continuously grow. whether it's, and some of these are seasonal. So basketball, I'm bullish about basketball, bullish about kabaddi, bullish about volleyball during the season that it's in, bullish about women's cricket, and I like calling that a separate sport rather than putting in the cricket bucket. You know, motorsports are extremely popular. Wrestling, the WWE is, you know, unofficially the #2 sport in the country, depending on how you choose to measure. So I think the magic of both digital and people understanding changing tastes and, you know, evolution of people's desires is that I dream that there is no clear #2, and there's a constant stream and fight for people to be loving and liking different things at different times, and that being what is #2. I think cricket will be #1 for quite a long time, and I think that's completely okay. But the pie just needs to get so big that there's a fight for #2 that we can never make a winner. Yeah, that's my.
And sorry, just to like, you know, give your question some justice also, is, you know, the NBA in India has been here for 7 years, and our goal is to become, you know, the #2, #3 sport in the next 5 to 7 years. And sport, you're right about the fact that, you know, cricket's got a long history in the country, and there are a lot of people involved in the ecosystem to make it big. Sport works in a pyramid structure where you start from the bottom in terms of grassroots building, right? And you get kids to play the sport and you kids to engage with it. And we run a program that engages 6 million kids every year to play basketball. Then, you know, there's an academy in Greater Noida, which is, you know, a fully scholarship resident academy that picks up the 25 best kids in India to, you know, in the hope that we'll find the next NBA player in the next 5 years from India. So a lot of grassroots work is happening, and through that you'll see the sport grow organically. And then obviously the media, you know, the media business is there to amplify that.
And there's another thing to think about there, right? As far as I know, and Mairu will correct me if I'm mistaken, the sport that's, well, the thing that's aired the most on sports networks today and is watched the most after cricket is actually WWE, right? In India, right?
That's what our data says as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, and whatever, right? Like right now, it's on a sports network, right? It's being aired on a sports network, and the thing to think about there is, why is that there? Because they're amongst the best storytellers on the planet, right? And they've created this cast of characters that has held us together for almost a generation. I certainly grew up, you know, following some of that. And so the real question then becomes, of all the sports that exist today and the leagues that exist today, who can tell the best stories while also focusing, I guess, on the grassroots? And like the combination of those two needs to be really strong to displace WWE. So it's not even a cricket conversation we're having a who can displace the WWE conversation.
Cool. I think we're good. No more questions? Are we done?
Yeah.
Are we,
I think we're done.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause for the panelists. Can I now invite Subrat Kar to please come on stage and offer a token of appreciation, please? Can we have a huge round of applause for Miss Asha Thacker, please? Thank you, Asha. Mr. Mairu Gupta. Thank you, Mairu. Thank you so much, Aneesh. I think, can we just have you guys on stage just for that one last commemorative photograph? Thank you, Aneesh. And thank you so much, Mr. Amit Doshi. Thank you. Guys, it's Saturday. A huge round of applause for everybody out here. Thank you so much.